The cameras were rolling, the stage was set, and the audience was expecting just another routine interview. But no one, least of all the smug journalist across from him, was prepared for what J.D. Vance was about to do. It started with a condescending smirk, a loaded question designed to corner him, to make him fumble, to paint him as out of touch. The journalist thought he had the upper hand, armed with statistics, media narratives, and the arrogance of someone who believed they had already won. But Vance wasn't there to play their game. He was there to expose it. As the tension in the room grew thick, he leaned forward, his voice steady, his words sharp as a blade. And with one devastating response, he didn't just answer the question, he dismantled the entire premise. The smirk vanished. The audience, once chuckling along with the journalist's snide remarks, fell silent, and in that moment, the entire interview shifted. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The interview was never meant to be fair. From the moment J.D. Vance stepped onto the brightly lit stage, the trap had already been set. The host, a well-known journalist with a reputation for cornering conservative guests, had been preparing for this moment. The production team had carefully selected clips, distorted statistics, and misleading questions, all designed to paint Vance as out of touch, hypocritical, or worse. The audience, hand-picked to include those who would jeer and clap on cue, had been primed for a show, not a discussion. It started subtly. The host smiled warmly, offering a few softball questions to lower Vance's guard. But beneath that politeness, there was an unmistakable edge, a condescending tone that suggested he was about to be exposed. Then, the real attack began. A carefully edited video clip played, splicing his past statements out of context to create a false narrative. The chyron at the bottom of the screen framed him as controversial, a subtle cue to viewers at home. The host leaned in, voice dripping with faux curiosity, and asked a question that wasn't really a question. It was an accusation wrapped in the pretense of journalism. The audience chuckled, sensing blood in the water. The trap had been sprung. The moment J.D. Vance opened his mouth to respond, the host pounced. No, hold on. Let's not dodge the question, he interrupted, raising a hand as if scolding a child. The audience chuckled on cue. Vance, unfazed, attempted to clarify his position, but the host wasn't interested in answers, only in spectacle. See, this is exactly the problem, the journalist sneered, turning to the crowd for validation. Politicians like you love to talk around the issue instead of facing facts. More laughter. The camera panned to smirking audience members, some shaking their heads in mock disappointment. Vance leaned forward, trying again. That's not what I said. Actually, it is, the host cut in, flashing a smug grin. We just played the clip. He motioned to the screen behind them, where a highly edited snippet of an old speech played out of context. The audience gasped theatrically. A few murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Vance inhaled sharply, keeping his composure. If you'll let me finish, I will, the host lied, waving dismissively. But first, let's get real here. He turned to the camera, voice dripping with mock concern. Isn't it funny how people like J.D. Vance, who claim to stand for the working class, always seem to end up on the side of big corporations? The audience erupted in applause. The question wasn't meant to be answered. It was a declaration, a setup. Vance opened his mouth again, but now the host was talking over him, listing out-of-context statistics, exaggerated claims, and outright falsehoods. The few times Vance did manage to get a word in, he was either interrupted mid-sentence or met with theatrical groans from the crowd, as if he were wasting their time. "Come on, JD," the host smirked. "Just admit it. You're not really for the people." Another burst of laughter. The studio had turned into an arena, and the host was reveling in his role as the orchestrator of Vance's public humiliation. Yet through it all, Vance sat there, eyes locked on the host, waiting. He knew this game. He knew the rhythm. And soon, the tide was about to turn. The smirk on the host's face lingered a moment too long, as if he truly believed he had J.D. Vance cornered. The audience's laughter echoed in the studio, but Vance didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly leaned back in his chair, let the noise settle, and then, with a calm but cutting tone, said, "Are you finished?" The host blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected confidence in Vance's voice. "I mean, because I've noticed a pattern here," Vance continued, voice even, but razor sharp. "Every time I try to answer, you cut me off. Every time I bring up a real point, you twist it into something I didn't say. And now, instead of letting the audience hear what I actually believe, you've decided for them." The crowd, once eager to laugh along with the host, suddenly fell silent. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. A few people nodded, realizing for the first time how the conversation had been controlled from the start. The host scoffed, trying to recover. "JD, I'm just asking tough questions." "No," Vance countered. "You're performing. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the audience. The host's smug demeanor cracked slightly, his fingers tightening around his cue cards. "Come on, that's ridiculous." "What's ridiculous," Vance pressed on, "is pretending this is an interview when it's clearly a scripted hit job. Let's be real. Your team cherry-picked a clip, cut out the context, and played it like a gotcha moment. But let's watch the full video, shall we? Not just the part that fits your narrative." He gestured to the production booth, challenging them to play the unedited version. The host hesitated. It was a split-second moment of indecision, but it was enough. The audience caught it. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Yeah, let's see it." The host shifted uncomfortably. "We don't have time for that." "So you had time to cut it, but not time to show the truth?" Vance's voice was sharper now, each word landing with weight. "Interesting." A few gasps. A slow clap started somewhere in the back of the audience. The host, clearly flustered, rushed to regain control. All right. I see what you're doing here. Playing the victim." Vance cut in immediately. "I don't need to play the victim. I just need you to stop playing the fraud." The audience erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a few cheers. The shift had fully happened. This was no longer the host's arena. It was Vance's moment. The host scrambled, his face reddening. "This is absurd, JD. We're just having a conversation." Vance chuckled, shaking his head. "No, you're trying to manufacture a moment. But here's the thing. You can't control how people see the truth once it's out." Social media was already lighting up. Clips of Vance's takedown were being recorded in real time. And as the host fumbled for a comeback, he had no idea. His loss was already trending. Within minutes of the heated exchange, the internet erupted. Clips of J.D. Vance's takedown spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Twitter was the first to explode. Vance destroys, host, Wax let him speak, and media bias exposed, all started trending within the hour. Users flooded the platform with side-by-side comparisons of the edited clip the show had aired versus the full uncut version that independent accounts were now circulating. The contrast was damning. YouTube was next. The full exchange, ripped straight from the broadcast, racked up millions of views within hours. Comment sections were ablaze with viewers dissecting the host's tactics, calling out his repeated interruptions and transparent attempts to spin Vance's words. This wasn't an interview, it was an ambush. One comment with tens of thousands of likes read. But Vance didn't just survive. He turned the tables. Others mocked the host's flustered reaction, posting memes of his panicked expression, captioned with phrases like, "when the script backfires." On TikTok, short clips of Vance's most savage comebacks flooded For You pages. One particular moment, where Vance called out the host for cherry-picking footage and demanded the full video be played, became an instant, viral soundbite. Creators stitched the clip into reaction videos, pointing out how the host's hesitation and scrambling spoke louder than any words. Even those who weren't politically aligned with Vance admitted, "You gotta respect how he handled that." As social media continued dissecting the moment, the backlash extended beyond just online chatter. Prominent figures from all sides of the political spectrum weighed in. Conservative commentators hailed Vance as a warrior against media manipulation, while even some neutral journalists admitted that the host's tactics were indefensible. Whether you agree with J.D. Vance or not, this was a hit job, and he exposed it masterfully. One well-known news analyst tweeted, adding fuel to the fire. The fallout wasn't just limited to online discussions. The show's network found itself in the crosshairs of controversy. Sponsors started feeling the heat. Within 24 hours, a major advertiser quietly pulled their commercials from the show's next scheduled airing. By the end of the week, multiple sponsors had distanced themselves, issuing vague statements about re-evaluating partnerships. Though the network attempted to downplay it, the financial hit was undeniable. Behind closed doors, executives scrambled to contain the damage. Internal emails leaked, revealing frantic discussions about how to spin the backlash. Some argued for a public apology, while others insisted on doubling down, claiming Vance had manipulated the moment for personal gain. But the public wasn't buying it. The more they tried to regain control of the narrative, the worse it got. Other public figures began speaking out. Political figures, media analysts, even former employees of the network chimed in, some revealing that this wasn't the first time the show had orchestrated an ambush. Anonymous sources started leaking behind-the-scenes details about how segments were edited to fit predetermined narratives, further fueling public distrust. As the pressure mounted, the network was faced with an impossible choice: acknowledge their failure or risk permanent reputational damage. But by the time they even considered addressing the controversy, the internet had already delivered its verdict. The host's credibility was shattered, and J.D. Vance's takedown had become a defining viral moment, one that no amount of damage control could undo. As the controversy reached a boiling point, J.D. Vance made a bold move. He announced legal action against the network. His legal team, composed of some of the most formidable attorneys in the country, filed a defamation lawsuit, arguing that the network had intentionally misrepresented his statements, edited the footage to create a false narrative, and engaged in unethical journalistic practices. The lawsuit alleged that the show's producers had not only ambushed him, but had also deliberately manipulated the interview to smear his reputation. The filing was met with immediate media attention, forcing the network into a defensive position. But the real bombshell came when leaked internal emails surfaced. Emails that exposed the calculated effort behind the interview. Whistleblowers from inside the network came forward, providing evidence that the producers had planned the ambush weeks in advance. Screenshots of internal discussions revealed that they had actively strategized ways to frame Vance as uninformed and extreme. One email from a senior producer even stated, "We need to make him look foolish, cut off his responses, push him into defensive mode." Another exchange revealed that they had instructed the audience members to react in specific ways, cueing applause, gasps, and laughter at predetermined moments to manipulate the perception of the debate. The leaks sent shockwaves across the media industry. Investigative journalists outside the network started digging deeper, uncovering a disturbing pattern of similar tactics used against other guests in the past. A former network employee, speaking anonymously, revealed that this wasn't just an isolated incident, this was standard practice. The goal was never an honest conversation, the insider admitted in a tell-all interview. It was always about pushing a narrative. If a guest didn't fit the mold they wanted, they made sure to paint them as a fool, even if they had to fabricate the evidence. As more whistleblowers stepped forward, the situation spiraled out of control for the network. One particularly damning revelation came from a junior editor who had worked on the post-production of Vance's interview. They provided raw, unedited footage, proving that the show had deliberately cut key portions of Vance's responses to make it appear as if he had stumbled or contradicted himself. They told us to slice it up, make him look weak, the editor disclosed. The full footage tells a completely different story. The revelations had legal consequences beyond Vance's defamation lawsuit. A coalition of media watchdog groups demanded a formal investigation into the network's journalistic practices. Multiple ethics complaints were filed, and lawmakers started calling for hearings on media transparency. Even rival news organizations, usually hesitant to criticize each other, couldn't ignore the scandal. Headlines declared, "Major network caught in explosive manipulation scandal and leaked emails reveal shocking deception behind viral interview." Under mounting pressure, the network attempted to contain the damage by placing blame on lower-level producers. The host, whose reputation had already been shattered, was abruptly placed on an extended leave of absence, but insiders claimed he was merely a scapegoat. The real decision-makers were scrambling behind closed doors, desperate to salvage what was left of their credibility. Despite their efforts, the damage was irreversible. The internet, already fueled by outrage, continued its relentless dismantling of the network's credibility. Independent analysts, armed with the leaked footage and insider testimony, created detailed breakdowns exposing every lie, every manipulation, and every deceptive tactic used during Vance's interview. Meanwhile, Vance doubled down. Rather than simply relying on the lawsuit, he took his fight directly to the public. In a series of high-profile interviews, he laid out the entire timeline of the setup, using the leaked evidence to back up his claims. His supporters rallied behind him, turning the lawsuit into a larger cultural battle about truth in media. As depositions began, more shocking details emerged. Former employees, once hesitant to speak, now had legal cover to testify. One longtime producer revealed that the network had routinely blacklisted certain figures, ensuring they were either misrepresented or completely shut out of major media discussions. Another whistleblower provided documentation showing how advertising dollars influenced editorial decisions. Certain topics were off-limits because they risked upsetting corporate sponsors. The legal fight dragged on for months, but the court of public opinion had already ruled in Vance's favor. The network's ratings plummeted, advertisers fled, and investors panicked. Their brand, once a dominant force in the industry, had become synonymous with media corruption. What began as a simple interview had spiraled into an industry-wide reckoning, one that no amount of damage control could reverse. In the aftermath of the scandal, the network found itself in an irreversible freefall. The credibility they had spent years building was now shattered, their reputation tainted by undeniable evidence of manipulation and bias. Viewership plummeted as audiences abandoned the channel in droves, outraged by the blatant dishonesty they had witnessed. Advertisers, once the network's lifeblood, pulled their funding, unwilling to be associated with a brand now synonymous with deception. Under mounting financial pressure and public outrage, executives were forced to make a drastic decision. The show that had ambushed J.D. Vance was permanently cancelled. The host, once a respected figure in media circles, was unceremoniously fired. Despite attempts to save face by framing his departure as a mutual decision, insiders revealed the truth. He had become too toxic, his presence an irreparable stain on the network. Attempts to launch damage control failed spectacularly as rival news outlets capitalized on the scandal, running exposés on the corrupt practices that had been exposed. Investigative journalists dug deeper, uncovering even more cases of misleading edits, pre-planned ambushes, and audience manipulation. Lawsuits from other public figures soon followed, each one citing Vance's case as precedent. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance emerged stronger than ever. What was meant to be an attempt at public humiliation had turned into an unshakable victory. His calm, calculated response in the face of an unfair attack had not only won him public admiration, but had also solidified his status as a fighter against media corruption. His social media following skyrocketed, with millions tuning in to hear his perspective directly rather than relying on mainstream narratives. Invitations for interviews poured in, not from legacy media, but from independent platforms that valued open discussion over scripted theatrics. Politicians and public figures who had previously distanced themselves from him now openly supported him, recognizing the power of standing against media bias. Vance took this momentum and turned it into action, advocating for media transparency laws and pushing for regulatory changes to prevent similar smear campaigns in the future. His name became a rallying cry for those who felt silenced, an emblem of resilience in the face of institutional corruption. The network, desperate to regain credibility, attempted a last-ditch effort to rebrand itself. They issued a public apology, promising reforms, but the damage was too great. No one believed them. Their attempts to introduce new programming were met with skepticism and mockery, as the internet refused to let them escape accountability. The once powerful media giant was now a shadow of its former self, scrambling to survive in an era where trust was everything. As the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a victory for J.D. Vance, it was a turning point. The scandal had forced a national conversation about integrity in journalism, making people question the narratives they were being fed. The audience, once passive consumers, had become more critical, more discerning, and more willing to seek the truth on their own. And as Vance stood before a packed auditorium, addressing a crowd that had rallied behind him, he left them with one final thought. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who has been silenced, misrepresented, and manipulated by those who claim to inform us. If you care about the truth, share this video. Because the more people see what really happened, the less power they have to deceive us again. And with that, J.D. Vance didn't just win the debate, he exposed the system. The network crumbled under the weight of its own deception, and the public woke up to the reality of media manipulation. But this isn't just about one interview. It's about a much bigger fight, the fight for truth. In a world full of noise, the truth still matters. Tell us in the comments, where do you stand?